Hi, I'm Scott for ediblemusic.com. Let's start this with the obvious because it will help us to find our way into the nuance of this topic. You're pursuing mixing because you love music. You've been listening to it your whole life. It makes you want to dance or pump your fist or nod your head at least. It fills you up with emotion, and you want to be able to mix in ways that will help the songs you're working on to bring out those kinds of emotions and those kinds of responses in the listeners of your work. But as you've been learning how to mix and you've been navigating all of these tools that you have to use in order to get a nice mix going, it can be really difficult to figure out how to use those tools to make a song sound the way that you know will sound good, the way that you know music can give that full emotion to a listener. Mixing is a very different way of experiencing music compared to listening to it. When you're listening, it's mostly passive. The music is acting upon you. But when you're mixing, you're doing something very different with your body, with your hands, with your ears, with your brain. You are acting upon the music and trying to imbue it with the qualities that will have that emotional and passive effect on the listener of your work. We have all helped or have been helped to calibrate a new television, and during that calibration process, adjusting the blacks or the temperature or the contrast, what is happening during that process is, sure, the person calibrating it is looking at the screen, but they're paying attention to how that calibration process is affecting what is seen on the screen. Once that calibration process is done, then you can kick back and enjoy the show. But it's similar to during mixing, where mixing is like that calibration process that completes the song, and then a person can kick back and enjoy the music. Now, your first approach to mixing began a long time ago. If you had a stereo that had treble adjusters or bass adjusters, or maybe it had a generic presets for jazz or rock or pop, that kind of thing. What that's doing is the stereo is applying an EQ curve to the whole of the track. When you're mixing, you very quickly find out that you're working with each part of the track individually and trying to get them to combine together. But that process, that initial process that you had when you were a little kid and you were playing with the adjusters on the stereo, that's something that will help you out, I think, to give you some familiarity with the process of monitoring the music that you're working on. This means that when you're making changes to your mix balance, whether adjusting the volume faders or adding some equalization or some compression or spatial effects like delays, then you're making changes to that program element and how it relates to the rest of the arrangement. So as you're making these processing adjustments, you're monitoring for how that processing influences the sound of both that program element and the program as a whole. If you're a musician, you've already approached this process and this way of thinking about it because, say, for example, if you're an electric guitar player, you're making adjustments to the knobs on your guitar, on your pedals, on your amp. As you're doing so, you're monitoring for how those adjustments influence the sound that will finally come out of the amp. That's a very different way of listening to what's coming out of the amp than when you're actually just playing a song. If you are a producer and you're working with synthesizers, you might be exploring very creatively and flexibly and letting sounds kind of introduce themselves to you, but you're still doing so purposefully because you want to look for a sound using these adjustments to the parameters that will fit with the song that you're working on. Monitoring means that you are engaging actively with the music that you're working on. And it means that your decisions as you're monitoring are purposeful and reflective, so that when you're adding some processing, whether it's some EQ or compression, again, or anything else really, you want to be able to compare to how those processing adjustments improve or dissolve the quality of that program element. Bypass it, compare it to how it sounded before, how it sounded after. Reassure yourself that that processing that you've added and those adjustments to the parameters that you've performed are actually solving the problem that you opened up the plugin for in the first place. And monitoring means that your mixing process is systematic so that you can recognize that it's iterative between bits of processing. Maybe you need to do a whole chain of processing, and that's okay because each will contribute to the resolution of the problem that you're trying to solve one bit at a time. And then you will be able to get that song that gives the listener that feeling, makes them want to nod their head or dance or tap their feet or what have you, and it lets you have fun.